everyone, my name is Derek and I am a Dildo-smith. I'm the creator of Amvidi and I make dildos every day. I'm here to do the weekly AMA Ask Me Anything. This is Ask a Dildo-smith, where I answer your questions about all things relating to dildos, dildo making, or anything else that might come up. Alright, so here we are. Daylight savings time has kind of thrown things for a loop a little bit because there's like light coming in from over there and it throws the lighting off and everything. So I'm kind of last minute scrambling to do a few things, but it's kind of distracted me. But yeah, so been a busy week, and I remember last week we did 3D printers for the aspiring Dildo-smith, and so that would be a good one to go back and watch if you've considered getting into making dildos or anything like that, even just 3D printing, because I think it was a fairly good overview. I did do it, so I mean that's kind of one thing. Oh, I gotta make sure my phone is off. This is what happens when I get flustered at the beginning. So last week we did 3D printers. And I think I'm going to kind of segue into prototyping this week, and prototyping in focus groups. I'm going to kind of skip over the mold making and things like that for a bit, but we'll do prototyping tonight and focus groups, probably a little bit more on focus groups than prototyping, but yeah. So, I would be remiss if I never mentioned my website where you can find all our toys and such. That would be www.amavidi.com. That's amavidi.com, or amavidi.etsy.com. And I think I've got all my notes here in front of me. Since we talked about kind of creating 3D models last week, and I've been working on dual density toys for the last 2 or 3 weeks or so now. And I thought this would be kind of a good point to pull out a few things and kind of talk about why the way they are the way they are, and what I'm looking for. And then going into the focus groups and talking about what I'm looking for in the members of my focus groups. So as I mentioned, we've been working on dual density toys, and next week all of the pre-production prototypes will be going out to my focus group, and they'll be able to get back to me with feedback, because while I think something might be awesome, people might have other opinions, and so I'm always interested to hear what they have to say. Like this is a gibbous in a dual density, and you can see this really squishy head up here, but then it's got this firm shaft. And you know, when I'm doing prototypes, it depends on what it is and why we're doing the prototypes. In this case, the models are already satisfied. We've already figured out what we're going to do for the models. It's purely about process at this point. And that's where things get a little bit experimental, where there's a lot less predictability in when you're playing with process. So in this case, we did, I think we're up to about 12 prototypes at this point, across 4 different models and probably 3 or 4 different combinations of firmnesses. Anything from, an A40 core, which is a really firm core, down to a 0020 surface, and different combinations, and trying to figure out what is required and what gets us where we want to go. And So, we're doing, like I said, probably about a dozen prototypes before we even get to the point where we're sending them out to focus group or anything like that. And there's a not insignificant cost to that, but it is a part of the process that you have to go through. And it's something that just is a cost of doing business. So yeah, that's what I've been working on this week. And the patrons this month are going to be getting a pre-production prototype as well. So we'll come back to Patreon later. But the way that we do our focus group testing is I have a core group of about 8 to 10 people that cover the range of male, female, trans, also straight, gay, bi, and trying to cover as many bases as possible. And it's kind of it's hard to put together a group that is that diverse and able to get the information back to me that I need. I have a lot of people who volunteer, and there are, I would say probably somewhere between more than a third of the folks who have volunteered and who are no longer in my core group of focus, my core focus group, never got back to me, never gave me any feedback. And so I had to drop them because I need that feedback. So we're down to, like I said, about 8 to 10 folks who are in that core group. I have gotten more than a few direct messages on Twitter of people volunteering to be testers who want to test prototypes. And then I also get people who ask, how do I become a tester? And number one, a blind message on Twitter is probably not going to get you where you need to go in that sense. And volunteering, being kind of volunteering out of the blue, unless somebody solicits testers, is probably not going to get you where you want to go. I think probably the best way to become a tester and to get into that pre-production stage is to participate in discussions, give feedback, and if you can be insightful and if you can help the maker see things a little bit differently, then that's going to bring value to them, and they're going to be able to see you as a valuable resource to them. And I don't mean to make it sound transactional, but there is definitely a relationship that happens between the maker and the testers. And the kinds of conversations that I have with folks about testing toys is, you've got to be comfortable talking to folks and talking to your friends, and maybe it's family. You've got to be comfortable talking about sex, what you like, what you don't like, how you use it, and even being open to suggestions or products that you normally wouldn't be interested in. If you're more into girthier toys and somebody comes up with a plug, then and they want you to give feedback, well, maybe that's a good match, maybe it's not. But if you volunteer for it, then you've got to be ready to give that feedback, even if it's not something you would normally use or try or like. So this week I put out a post on my Facebook page, and it was kind of funny. I just said, looking for toy testers among my friends, and got buried in requests. Some of them from friends that I haven't heard from in years. Actually had one, there was a girl I went to high school with, and I'm not going to tell you how long ago that was, but there was a girl I went to high school with who volunteered, and that was kind of a surprise. So we had to have a separate conversation about, can we talk about sex? Can we talk about how these are used? And it's not the conversation that comes up every day in most people's worlds. And the funny thing is, it is the kind of conversation that comes up in my world every day, because I may be talking to one of my minions and we're bouncing ideas off of each other. And, we're talking about how this would work vaginally versus anally. Are we going for a prostate play or G-spot play? Is this a good option as a grindable? All of these kind of conversations are things that I have every day, but my friends don't always. And one of the funny transitions is when they find out what I do, and then they want to participate, and then the floodgates open, and we can talk about sex all day. But until then, it's not something that would ever come up. So, yeah. Got buried in requests. I took on about 6 new testers. These are people. The reason I'm bringing in new people is that I'm going to be using some of my core group and matching them with products that they have already tested with dual density versions of those. That way they can do kind of an A/B test against each other. But I also want some fresh eyes who have never seen anything that I've made before, never tried it, and able to give me new feedback from a different perspective. And within that group, before I take anybody on, I'm asking them questions about, have you ever played with silicone toys? And have you ever played with dual density toys? And can you have a conversation about this afterward? And are you open to trying things that normally wouldn't be on your menu? And there were a few that I had to weed out because they weren't able to they weren't able to have the conversation in a way that I thought would be productive. So, yeah, I've brought in, kind of refreshed my core group a little bit, brought in some new blood, and we'll be sending those out this week. And hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll have some feedback. And if I were optimistic, I would say we might have these out by beginning of April. But here's the complication, is that this week, earlier I said this week was kind of crazy. I signed a lease on a new studio space. We've already outgrown the space that we're in, and so I signed a lease on a new studio space, and that's supposed to happen we're supposed to take possession beginning of April, and then we're supposed to be completely moved in by beginning of May. So, all of these things that happen around the same time, because if I'm trying to get this new product out at the beginning of April and we've got a move going on, it's going to be a little bit difficult. So, kind of sidebarred there a little bit. If there are any questions or comments or anything about testing and focus groups and things like that, drop them in the chat. Send me a direct message on Twitter. Twitter handle is Amavidi at AMAVIDI. We got a new Twitter handle a couple weeks ago, so I'm having to reset myself. And yeah, you can send us a direct message. I've got George over here who is handling all of the chat and direct messages and wrangling all of the things in the background for me. So there's a question here. What do you look for in a focus group? I kind of touched on that a little bit in terms of I want a spread of personalities and backgrounds, and I kind of have an idea of who my core customer is, but I also want to spread beyond that a little bit, kind of one or two tiers beyond that, because I never know who's going to like what until it gets out there. And there are some that have surprised me about who likes any particular design. Like the twist and the unicorn horn, I thought would be much more popular with folks who are looking for prostate play. And from what I'm seeing, it is less about prostate specific, but it is anal oriented, and it is something that they're good entry level pieces if people are experimenting with anal play. So yeah, I'm always kind of curious to get some perspective from folks who are not in my core group of focus, my customer focus. Messed up here and didn't bring up everything that I needed to before. Hopefully there's some music in the background. There's a question. How do you find people besides Facebook? I have ideas, but I can say that I haven't taken anybody who I didn't know personally. And part of that is just my comfort level with being able to have conversations with people. However, there are folks who, such as my Patreon, the patrons I have on Patreon, they would be a group that I would go to fairly early on if I were looking to add beyond Facebook, because I know that they have a variety of my toys and I can see what they have, and that gives me the opportunity to produce a prototype that they can A/B test against something they already have in their collection. And so yeah, that would be my first go-to. Second to that would be there are some folks on Twitter that I have developed, I wouldn't say developed a relationship with, but there are folks that I have had conversations with who I would be more than happy to send them toys for testing. But the funny thing is they've never asked. So that's the funny part, is that the people that I would want to send toys to have never asked. So I'll probably hit them up out of the blue one of these days and see if they're interested in giving any feedback. So, another question. How blunt are those conversations? What sort of questions do you get into? Kind of the way that the conversation starts is kind of just an overview of how they played with the toy. Was it vaginal? Was it anal? Was it more of a texture toy for them? And then we get to be fairly blunt about it. There was one who said that the gibless was you could start a fire with it. I think the way she put it was, you get going too fast and you could start a fire with that. You might be able to hear George cracking up in the background. But yeah, that was one of the pieces of feedback I got, was if you go too fast with a gibless, you could start a fire with that thing. And so that kind of led into a conversation about how they were using it, lubes that were being used, whether or not they were using anything else to warm up with, things like that. Was this, the first go-to toy for them, or had they started with something else, warmed up to it, and then been using it? So the questions can get fairly blunt. Even when I'm talking to I have one tester who is a bi guy, and being able to talk about, did this have the right curve for your prostate? Was it too stiff in terms of, I can't remember exactly how I put it, but it was something along the lines of, was it too stiff and aggressive against the prostate, or could it have been more aggressive? And, it gets fairly technical, but it's also fairly blunt. So yeah, probably the funniest comment I got was the one about the gibless starting a fire. The Saturnalia was also one. He compared it to a plunger, and the comment was that it was that can dry a girl out real fast. So yeah, I mean, the comments are hilarious in some instances, but they're also very, very on point to, these are the problems that we had. Some of the most helpful comments are the ones where people are exploring their boundaries a little bit, and maybe they haven't done anal play in the past, and they start exploring and they find something that they really like, and they're surprised by how much they enjoyed it. One of them, the dough, is one that surprises folks who are getting into prostate play. It surprises them at how much sensation you can get out of something so simple. And yeah, I think the helpful comments come from people who are stepping outside of their normal comfort zone. All right. Another question. Does the feedback you receive inspire new products? It gets filed away in my head, and I would like to say that I can directly connect a point of feedback to a new product. Actually, the gibless. I keep coming back to this one, but the gibless was several of the comments talked about the texture and how much they liked the texture and using it as a texture toy as opposed to a penetration toy. And that has led to some conversations and some thoughts about penetrables and grindables and things like that. So yeah, the feedback does eventually get back around. It takes a while to work through my brain, but yeah. All right, let's see. I think George is putting together a few questions from the chat, or actually from the direct messages, I'm sorry. From direct messages. And while she's doing that, I'm going to do a shameless plug because that's kind of, well, I say that. I take 30 seconds to a minute out of each episode where I can do a shameless plug. Let me make sure that I've got this showing correctly. Yeah, there we go. Does that work? Does that work? This is what I want. I keep clicking on things and it doesn't do what I want it to do. There we go. All right. So we have Patreon. And like I said, the folks who are at the Flourish level this month, they're going to get a dual density toy. And so yeah. The main Flourish level is $40, and that gets you a new toy every month, and that will be something that is either a prototype like what we're doing with the dual density toys, or a new colorway that hasn't gone out before, or we might reach back into some of the early designs that never made it out into the wild. We'll pull some of those and we'll send those to folks. We also have, where is it? There it is. If you're international, then we do have the $60 a month version, and the price difference there is literally just the difference in postage. So yeah, Patreon. All right. See if George is able to get something. All right. And what comments do you get regarding colors versus the physical designs? Colors are so personal that it's hard to say. It's like I do take the feedback, especially if somebody points something out that they really like, then I'll take that feedback and maybe go back and iterate on that a few times to see if I can come up with something I like as well. But generally speaking, I'm looking for feedback on the physical design as opposed to the colors. Like, you know, this is not the most attractive color. Actually, this is not bad for the Parabolica because it has that kind of tentacle Cthulhu kind of thing going on. So, you know, the green on this is actually kind of appropriate. But a lot of times we'll actually not be focused on the color so much. And a lot of times, even the ones that go out as testers are single colors. And they really don't have, the color is just not the focus at this stage. So, let's see, there was one. Okay, well, they're going to get personal on this one, huh? Do you test them? I joke and say that not only am I the president, but I'm a customer as well. So yes, I do test my own toys, and I do share them with my partners as they are interested. Some of them, some designs are just not that interesting to certain folks, and so they don't end up being tested with them. But yeah, it's kind of, I would be surprised if a maker didn't test their own toys. But I can also understand that there are some things that just aren't to the taste of certain folks. I think one of the, oh geez, George is reminding me of one that was just a complete horror show. We called it the corn cob. Not because it looked like, not like it was shaped like a corn cob, but it was just, it had the most unfortunate color. It was this ugly, pukey, yellow-orange kind of thing that was rock hard A40 in a Saturnalia. And that thing was just a complete train wreck from start to finish. There was nothing redeeming about it. Yeah, it was something to learn from, but it was a complete train wreck. All right. Okay. I got 2 more questions, and then actually I'll kind of combine these 3 questions, and I'll probably wrap it up at that point. Do you pay your focus groups? Do they know who else is testing? And do they have like group conversations? I do not pay my focus groups. It's purely volunteer, and I'll put the word out and they can volunteer or not. I do have a secret/private Facebook group that I post in, and they're able to volunteer or not as they wish. So I don't get demanding with folks, but I don't pay them other than they get to keep the toys. So do they know who else is testing? Maybe not directly, but they can infer based on the people who respond in the secret group. And from there, they can kind of infer. But as far as a group conversation, it hasn't happened yet. It could. The secret group is there for anybody in the group to use a discussion and have conversations, but I think they're comfortable having those conversations with me as opposed to in a semi-public forum. You know, even if it's a small group, there's still kind of a public thing about it. So I think, unless there's anything else, does anybody have any questions? It's been kind of a crazy week, and I'm kind of wore out, so probably gonna wrap it up. Kind of scrolling back through some of the comments here. Yes, a plunger. They referred to that, the Saturnalia. They compared it to a plunger. And yeah, there are some folks out there who are totally interested in trying new stuff before everyone else. Yeah. Oh, okay. 2 more, and then now there's maybe another one coming in. Okay, 2 more, and then we're done. How do you protect privacy? Number 1, if they're in the secret group on Facebook, then number 1, nobody knows that the group exists. Can't search for it unless you know what it is. Number 2, even if you found the group, you couldn't see who the members are. And anybody who joins the group has to agree to certain criteria and certain standards. One is that what happens in the group stays in the group, and that they have to be able to have frank and blunt conversations without judgment. And if anybody looks like they're even getting close to not being comfortable with those parameters, then I'll move them out of the group. So it's the privacy is there. In this world today, we don't have a whole lot of privacy, but I can put up the walls and ask each of the people to respect those boundaries, and then just react as I need to. And what are your responsibilities to testers? I can think of one thing specifically. Early on, I had a plug design that never made it into production. It was a very early prototype, and it was one that I made sure that anybody who, I think only one or two people got one of them, and it was supposed to just be a showpiece, have a fun little desk toy or something. But I made sure that they knew that this was not safe for anal play. The base of it was just not layered enough and not strong enough to keep it from getting fucked up inside. And so my responsibility to them is to let them know the limits that I think the toys are appropriate for, and that, you know, the funny thing is that anything that would get to the point where I would share it with somebody else is something that I would experiment with or play with on my own. And so, you know, my responsibility is that I wouldn't put something in somebody else's hands that I wouldn't be comfortable with myself. So, all right. I think I'm kind of talked out. I barely even touched my adult beverage this evening. So, we'll do this again next week. And let's see, next week, George will not be here. So it's going to be just me. And I think the topic next week is going to be the firmness scale, the shore hardness scale, and how it relates to toys and how to interpret those firmnesses and what I, as a maker, look for in that. So, yeah, I think that's about it. I've got to click some things here, and I should be able to kind of do an outro where I want you guys to know that I appreciate you joining me to do it